Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. I'm very honored tonight and excited because always wanted to have this guest on. It took me a long time to find him, but I finally did. And he's the former quarterback for the Derby Red Raiders. He was the quarterback for the 1984 season. Terrific athlete, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Brian Oliver. And Brian, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, let me ask you, first off, what I found very interesting when talking to you the other day is you really didn't play football until your freshman year, which is, not unusual for a lot of, athletes, but it is unusual when considering the position you played. And yet, you were able to be a starting quarterback for Derby. But let me ask you, how did you finally decide to go out for football? What made you finally do it?
Well, my mother told me I couldn't play until I went to high school. But, growing up, we played, baseball, basketball, football, sandlot football. And I always I just loved throwing the ball. So
right.
I remember freshman year, they said that there was a meeting and Coach DeFrancisco, the kids were going in and he says, something I can't remember exactly what he said, but he wanted to make me a guard. He took a look at me and he said, "You're going to be a guard." And I said, "I want to be a quarterback." And he said, "You could throw the ball." And I said, "Yeah, I could throw the ball." So I ended up if I didn't say anything, I'd have been a guard.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, you growing up as a kid, Derby football was at its best. I mean, they dominated the Hoosie. They were the cream of the crop, Lou DiFilippo, players like John Pagliaro, Mike Kiley, guys like that. So let me ask you, did you go to a lot of Derby games? I'm sure you were very aware of the success of Derby football.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like the town stopped on weekends to go over to the field. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Brian. I know you loved throwing the football as a young kid, but was there a sport? You mentioned sandlot and stuff. I mean, were you a baseball fan growing up, basketball? Like, what was your favorite sport as a kid?
Football.
Yeah, definitely.
I played freshman baseball. I only played baseball 1 year.
Yeah.
I don't even think I made the whole year. Basketball, I think I played 1 year, but I just wasn't into it like football. So if I wasn't playing football, I was in the gym.
Right. And let me ask you this, was there anybody that, when you were a kid that played for Derby that you really idolized or you enjoyed watching a lot, what that made you really get into, the Derby football program?
Well, no, not in Derby in particular. I mean, I was a big Joe Montana fan.
Right.
So
you like Notre Dame then, I would imagine, correct?
I like Notre Dame, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I took the test for Notre Dame High School, and that didn't exactly. It was just better that I went to Derby. I passed the test for Notre Dame. My older brother went to Notre Dame, and he played there. But I was a little on the smaller side, so if I went to Notre Dame, I probably wouldn't have played.
Right. It's very interesting, Brian, that your mother didn't let you play till high school. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think your younger brother Mike played a couple of years for Derby as well, correct? I know he eventually went to cross country, but he did play a couple of years. Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting that you both weren't able to play football till high school. It seems like both of you really, were itching to play it.
Yeah, well, we were always outside playing. I mean, constantly in the neighborhood. There was a lot of kids in the neighborhood. Everybody was outside playing. But, they just didn't want – they had just had this thing with contact sports until we got into high school.
Right.
So, which I guess it was I really didn't have it, when you're growing up in the 70s, that's it.
Right. Brian, let me ask you this. Freshman year, you mentioned that you wanted to be a quarterback. DeFrancisco said you were going to be a guard. But, you convinced them, obviously. Were you the starting quarterback for that freshman team freshman year?
Freshman year going in, I knew I was not first in line. There was another kid that had experience, and they knew from like Pop Warner and stuff.
Yeah.
My phone's going. But he ended up quitting, so I ended up starting. As a matter of fact, I just thought about this the other day.
Yeah.
I played. We were undefeated as freshmen. I started junior varsity, sophomore and junior years, and the first football game I ever lost was Ansonia as a senior.
Right. Yeah. Talk about that. 1981 freshman team, because I always heard they went undefeated, and
Undefeated.
I would have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure they're the last freshman team to be undefeated. So talk about that team a little bit, because you had a lot of good players on that team. Obviously, Jeff Rice. I think even Jeff Davis played that year. But you had a talent of Carloni. You had a ton of talent on that team. Talk about that freshman team a little bit.
Yeah, I went to school with Damian Carloni since we went to St. Mary's, a little tiny school in Derby. I don't even think it's there anymore. From kindergarten. So I met Jeff Rice as a freshman at the football field, and God, yeah, I met all those guys there. Dave Tyne and the line. We had a good line. That's the key. Sante Di Matteo, Salamonica. Salamonica was a guard, and you wouldn't want him. You wouldn't want him coming at you.
Right.
And that's what it was when you have. So I can't really compare it to anything else, because that's the first time I played organized football. I was just out there. I wanted to throw it every time, but when you have a guy like Jeff Rice, I think that's what made everything work so good. Is they were so in the back of their mind, this guy's coming running at you full steam and he's going to run you over. And the next thing you know, we drop back and you could throw. We had some guys that could run and catch, and it was fun.
Right. And let me ask you this, Brian. We'll get to your senior year, in a little bit, but talk to me about that first game as a freshman against Ansonia. You finally get to experience that rivalry on some level, obviously the freshman level. Talk about that game and what that was like for you.
We did not play Ansonia our freshman year. Something happened.
You didn't.
I don't remember what happened. It might have been rained out, but we played St. Joseph Trumbull instead, and everybody was saying that's a mistake. We're going to get beat. They're bigger. We ended up beating them. I think we beat them pretty good, but we did not play Ansonia. We played Shelton as freshmen. We did not play Ansonia as a freshman or JVs, sophomore and junior year. For some weird reason, we never played Ansonia.
Wow. So basically, it wasn't until your senior year where you finally got a taste of that rivalry. Right. So let me ask you this, Brian. Going into your sophomore year, that's always the learning year. I believe your sophomore year, that team made the playoffs, so they got beat by Ansonia in the state final game. And I think they had John Dorsch, and there was trying to think who the other guy was that they were sharing time at quarterback. But just talk about that 82 experience, because, it was obviously a learning year for you, but you got to experience the playoffs a little bit.
Yeah, it was a big-time learning year. That senior team, and when I was a sophomore, those guys were big. They were they were big. So I think, are you talking about Dave Bakioki? I think that was his name.
Yeah, probably, yeah. I know him and John Dorsch kind of split time, and I think Ronnie Bartone was a big factor on that team.
Yeah.
But that team only lost, I believe, 2 games the whole year. Won the Hoosie. They only lost to Ansonia twice. But just talk about, because that's that would be Lou DiFilippo's final year too. So at least you got to experience 1 year with Lou. Talk about Lou a little bit. What was that experience like?
Oh, he was something else. He was a tough guy, but it was the reputation. Everybody knew him. I had a good. He was a gym teacher too, so he always called me Ollie. He was a nice guy. Nice guy, tough on you. But in a way where he wanted you to learn and, not be afraid, but learn. And he was such a nice guy.
Right. And you brought up Coach DeFrancisco as your freshman coach. I mean, you got any good DeFrancisco stories? Because as you know, John D's legendary for, not only coaching, but also for, the unique stories that they have.
Oh,
Any
yeah.
any stories that stand out to you in your career with him?
He was just, he was passionate. He was loud, he's
Yeah.
Coach D. But he did the line. He was the line coach. So it was my coach freshman year, who actually followed after freshman year, was Mr. Zuba.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. He kind of, I liked him. I felt like he liked me. We had a good, we got along well. And it kind of was interesting how from freshman year, most freshman coaches don't follow to the varsity, but because when Big Lou left, they came to varsity, and it was almost like seamless, kind of. It wasn't, Mr. Charlie came in, and he was different than Lou, but he was more. I can't really explain the way he was more technical. I want to use the word technical, but
Right.
he had a method, like steps. We're gonna go in steps.
Right. So talk about I was going to just bring that up. 83 season comes your junior year. Lou steps down and Charlie comes in, and it was a difficult season that year. The team went 5-5. But let me ask you, did you get any varsity time that year, or were you strictly just
Only a
junior
couple of
varsity?
plays.
Yeah.
I only got. I remember one play they put me in varsity for a double pass. I think it was the Amity game. But no real, no.
Right. And I want to talk about one particular game your junior year. It was the Ansonia game. They were ranked number 1 in the state. They were heavily favored, and you guys almost pull off the upset. You lose 19-13. And Jeff Rice had a monster game that game. Just talk about Jeff Rice a little bit, because Brian, he sometimes, and he shouldn't be, but sometimes he's forgotten. I mean, he was an unbelievable running back who, he could just run you over with that ball.
So they came up with a play, and I still remember this. It was called 40 handback trap. And this play, Ansonia, for some strange reason, they had a very difficult time stopping it. We ran the heck out of it. We only ran it a couple times my senior year, which was a little weird. But
Right.
that game in particular, my junior year, we ran the heck out of that, and they were pulling guard. You pull a guard, and we were running straight up the middle, and he was ripping off big chunks of yardage in that game. Jeff Rice was a machine. That's the best way I can describe him. He was a machine. It is like a train coming through the hole, and you're gonna have to stop it.
Right. And, he was, like I said, he was, he could stand up there with anybody in the state as far as running backs go. I mean, he was just that good. And, he had no fear. He wanted the ball every time. Talk about Charlie a little bit, though, Brian, because, one thing for you as a quarterback, Charlie was more known for being a running coach back then. So, quarterback wasn't necessarily always going to throw the ball, but he always put in, pass plays that would definitely, bootleg, stuff like that. So, I mean, he always got the quarterback involved, even though it looked like he was more of a running coach.
Yep. Well, I mean, it was no secret. I love to throw the ball, and we kind of were okay at it with Tom Abel. And even in junior varsity, the coach for junior varsity coming up, Mr. Zuba, would do the calls, and he loved throwing the ball too. So
yeah,
I think Mr. DeCenzo saw, you got Jeff Rice, who's a workhorse, and all of a sudden now you got a couple, Tom Abel, Bert DeForest, Mark Rotadori was out there.
yeah.
Now you got guys that can run and throw, and then the line, it's kind of like it blended really well. It worked out really well.
Right. So, Brian, let me ask you. I believe junior year you went out for track, and you were pretty good at the javelin. Just talk about going out for track. One thing about track is they always had great coaching. I believe they had Eugene Waring. They had Buster Jadek. Just talk about going out for track junior year.
So I was not the fastest runner, and everybody used to poke fun at me, which was okay. I wasn't going anywhere. I was a drop back passer. I was not running. And Mr. Waring, the track coach, always used to get on me. Ali, come out. I'll help you. I'll increase your speed. So finally I went out, and I ended up doing 2 events. He wanted me to run. I tried one. I wasn't a runner. I wasn't built to run. So I did pole vault. Nobody was doing pole vault. And one of my friends, Chip Mandela, showed me how to do the pole vault. So I did pole vault, and I was okay at it, but they wanted me to do it because I guess you get points, right? For every event, somebody competes in it. So I always did it. I would do like 10'6". I could do 10'6", but I love throwing the javelin. And I was pretty good at that. Buster taught me how to throw the javelin. And we went to the States, and I took silver medal in the States.
Right.
Yeah.
The javelin is pretty fun to throw too, and I mean, if you have the arm for it, which you did, you could really excel at it. Were there any meets that stood out to you that year that you really performed well in?
I don't remember which one. One of them I threw a 51 meters. So like 50-meter was the one, you wanted to get. That was like a big deal. 50 to hit 50.
Right.
One of them, one meet I threw a 51. It wasn't the state one. The kid that took the one, I don't remember where he was from, but he threw over 50 in the States.
Right. And Brian, one thing about track, I always said this, it's the one sport where you could kind of, relax when you're on the bus rides and stuff. They're fun. The meets are fun because you got a lot of downtime sometimes before you do your event. So it's like the one sport where it's kind of like, football, you got to constantly think, and, basketball, same thing. But track, you kind of just relax, and, you just go out there, you do your events, and then you're done.
Right.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was something to do. I hadn't tried it, and I wish I did it. I wish I tried it. I wish I started it earlier, but like I said, freshman year going in, I did all 3 sports. I did basketball, baseball, football, and then kind of weaned off of the baseball. I knew I was going the way of football, and yeah.
And now, did you do basketball, during high school?
Nope.
No. Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you though, Brian, since we're talking about basketball, you had some pretty good athletes in your class for the basketball team. Jeff Davis, Michael Dawson, I believe Chip even played, if I'm not mistaken. Let me ask you, why do you think Derby just has always struggled in basketball? What do you think that this, the big factors, the height, or, what would you say?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe, I remember freshman year, they would practice these plays. I guess maybe it was from a standpoint of, and then we would get in the game and we wouldn't do the plays. So there might have been a misunderstanding of team basketball, and we thought maybe we were around the corner playing basketball. It was just, I don't know.
Right. So
I don't know.
Right. So, Brian, let me ask you, senior year of football now, let me ask you, the winter of that year or even the spring, did Charlie basically make it known to you that you were going to be the starter? Did you have to kind of win the job, or were you going into that season, were you going to be the starter?
I don't recall if he ever said. There was always a thing with Derby. It was almost like you were waiting your turn to be a senior. It's almost like a given.
Right.
I mean, I knew Mark Searles was behind me, and we were going against each other in the red and
white game. Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think he did better than me during the red-white scrimmage, but I don't know. They just put me. I kind of just was the starter.
Took the reins. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Brian. let's talk about your first varsity game. I mean, as a starter, were there a lot of nerves or were you relaxed? I mean, how was that first experience like?
Every game, every game, there was butterflies. Every
Yeah.
game, there was always butterflies. But I remember the first play. I remember the first play of the Cheshire game. We threw a bomb. We just
Yeah.
like we're throwing. We opened up and Tom Abel dropped. I don't know if he touched his hand. I don't know if the ball touched his fingers or if it was just out of reach. It was almost first play of the game, and
Yeah.
then we ran. I always like running the ball because running the ball calmed me down.
Yeah.
And then we did Jeff Rice up the middle. I don't remember it was a gain. Then we came right back with the same play, and it was a 40-yard touchdown pass on the third play of the game.
Right.
First
And correct me
game.
if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. I think you hit Abel about 8 times that season, correct? I think he had a great year receiving the ball. I think he had at least 8 touchdown catches that year.
Yep.
And, Brian, one game in particular that stands out was a game against Amity your senior year. I think at the time you broke the passing record. I think you had 234 yards. So, talk about that Amity game because, it has to be a good feeling when you realize that your introduction to high school football didn't begin until 9th grade. And here you are a senior and, you break the passing record. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that game, one of the plays was a screen. So I do remember it was a big gain. I don't remember, might have been like a 90-yard touchdown. So what you get the passing yards for throwing a screen pass, and then the guy rips off 90 yards. But I didn't know at the time. I didn't even know. I think I found out like a week later that 234 yards was at that time the most passing yards in a game for Derby. I don't know since then. I'm sure it's been broken.
Right. Brian, one thing about that team in '84 is the year before Derby had went 5-5. So that '84 team got Derby back to where they needed to be, competing for the Whoosy. You guys went 8-2. So I mean, did it feel good? I know, like you would have liked the outcomes against Shelton and Ansonia to be better, but did it feel good to know that as a starting quarterback, your only season you go 8-2?
Sure. I mean, 37 years have gone by, right? And I can still remember the Ansonia game. So that was a big one.
Right.
They
and
were
talk
good.
about that. Talk about that game, Brian, because I think as you were telling me the other day, is you were so nervous during that game that the first play of the game you threw a pick.
First play. I hyperventilated coming out of the locker room. I had to like pull on my belt. I couldn't even breathe. And then the next thing you know, they're doing the coin toss, and I didn't even really get a chance to relax. And they're calling the first play, and I'm on the field. And man, if you see I was looking at the pictures. My uniform was filthy. That game, I was on the ground all the time. Yeah, I dropped back. It was sideline and seam, 17 sprint out, sideline and seam, and I overthrew Mark Rotadoria, and it was picked off the first play of the game.
Yeah, and that was a great Ansonia team too, though. I mean, they had a lot of talent that year: John Hunt, Ellis Ings, Jeffrey Coppola. So I mean, it was a tremendous Ansonia team. But let me ask you, I mean, that for a long time that was the big thing with Derby. They had trouble, finally breaking that Ansonia curse. I mean, did you guys think you had a shot that year, or did you know they were really good?
No, we thought we had a shot. I remember the Torrent. So the week before we played them, they were upset by Torrington.
Yeah.
So I think in the back of my mind, that wasn't good for us.
Right.
Right. So, boy, I wish I can go back 37 years and do it all over again. I'd do a lot of different, but no, their defense and offense was clicking on everything that we turned the ball over. I think I threw 4 picks in that game. I think I threw 4. Just nothing was working.
Right. And Brian, one game that stands out to me your senior year as well is a game against Seymour, because I mean it was so foggy that day at DeBarber Field. you couldn't really. I don't even think you guys could throw that much because it was so foggy that I think Charlie gave the ball to Jeff about 35 to 40 times that game.
It
Talk
was a
about that, Seymour. Talk
30
about that.
I think, right?
Yeah.
I think we couldn't even see the stands.
Yeah, it was brutal. Yeah.
Yep.
Talk about that game a little bit. I mean, what was that like playing it? Could you see the ball at least when you were?
Oh yeah, you could see, just like the guys on the field, where you're immediate playing, the fog was just something else. And no, there was no matter of fact, I think there was minus yards passing, but it was a back and forth game. Nothing was really happening. And then I don't remember what quarter it was. It was I handed off to Jeff Rice and he broke it, and it was a real long run.
Right. Brian, like I said, the outcome, I know, against Ansonia and Shelton wasn't great, but a real good year for you guys. I mean, a great senior year. You go 8-2, and I mean, you had a good year as quarterback. So, I mean, sure, you regret, not having a better game against Ansonia, but you really couldn't ask for a better senior year than the one you had, correct?
Oh, it was great. It was great. And Shelton game, we were there right through the 3 quarters. It was 0-0 halftime. To the end of the third quarter, when we scored, it was 7-0, and they scored twice in 11 seconds or something like that.
And that was a good Shelton team that year too. I think they won the Boozy, But so let me ask. Yeah, he was real good. So let me ask you this, Brian. Season comes to an end. I mean, did you think about advancing your football career, or did you pretty much resolve yourself that this would be it for you?
Oh no, I played football for University of New Haven for my freshman year. I went to a few schools, but I liked University of New Haven because the coach they were very similar offense to Derby, where it dropped back, big backs, they were pound the ball, a little drop back. Their quarterback was a senior. They had nobody else in between. So they recruited four guys. And I went from fourth. I committed very late. I went from fourth on the depth chart to starting freshman year.
Wow.
And then the end of the year, the head coach leaves.
Oh, and that's never good.
No.
Yeah.
He went to Columbia University, and in came a coach. I think his name was Chris Palmer from the defunct New Jersey Generals.
Yeah.
And then he went to the NFL, and the lineman coach, Tony Sperano, head coach of the Miami Dolphins, passed away.
Yeah.
He ended up calling me at my house. I didn't go back. I went back sophomore year and played, and it was not the Coach Palmer brought in the run and shoot offense.
And that was it.
That was it. Yep.
Right. So let me ask you, 37 years later, Brian, do you still love the game of football? Do you still watch college and the NFL? I mean, are you still into it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
And let me ask you, have you kept up with Derby at all? I mean, they obviously a lot of changes. The football program hasn't really been good in a long time, but I mean, have you been able to keep up with Derby since you got out?
A little bit more. Like my father lives in Derby, so through him and I went down and took a look at the new field. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Yep. A little bit.
Yeah. And, Brian, I mean, it's interesting because, you're part of a fraternity in Derby football because, quarterback is a tremendous position. It's very important. And, what I always found fascinating when I went to high school and I learned what quarterbacks do is it's not about just throwing the ball, handing it off to the running back. You got to know where everybody's going. You got to hand the ball to the back at the right spot, throw the ball, drop back and stuff. So it's a lot of stuff to retain. So, I mean, you have to be a very smart player as well, not just a great, athlete.
Oh, a lot of practice, tons of practice. It's all the handoffs, everything's synchronized. You're right. It's guys are in the same place each play. Of course, mistakes are made,
Yeah.
But it's a lot of practice. It was years of practice every day, and even in the off season. In the off season, we were practicing. The guys would get together. So, yeah.
Right. So, Brian, let me ask you. what's Brian Oliver doing today? 37 years later. Like, I mean, his athletic career was great, but in your professional career, what are you doing these days?
I drive a truck now.
Oh, wow. God bless
Truck
you.
driver.
Yeah.
I had shoulder surgery when I was like 29. I
Oh,
was
wow.
recreational softball, and all those years of throwing finally caught up to me.
Right.
So,
So Brian, let me ask you this. What advice would you give to the younger players, guys that are either playing for Derby or playing for another school who really want to be, a good quarterback, running back, tight end, whatever it might be, a tackle? What advice would you give those guys who are trying to be, better at their game of football?
learn as much. I would say learn as much as you can, because I learned more. I learned so much. My first year of college was amazing. We didn't study in high school. You really don't study defenses like in college. The plays are designed where if you're in, depending on where the safety is, dictates where the ball's going. I remember in college, the first year, freshman year, you would walk up to the line of scrimmage and the play in your head and you're looking at the safety and where he is on the field. You already know where you're throwing the ball.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's just learn and
Right.
and practice.
Right. So, Brian, before we go, what does Derby football mean to you? I mean, 37 years later, what was the thing that you took the most out of it?
I remember, well, all of my friends. I mean, growing up, that's when you're growing up in Derby. That the biggest thing was Derby football. That's what. And I remember when I went to University of New Haven. We're sitting in the coach's office, and my father asked the coach. He said, "This is not fair to ask with me sitting there." He said, "Is he good enough to play college football?" And the coach looked at my father and he said, he plays for the Valley. He plays for Valley football. It's the toughest football in the country.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And it really was. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a great time to, well, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I've been trying to get you on a few years. Glad I found you. That 84 season, like I said, I mean, Charlie really needed that second year to be a great year. And, you and your fellow seniors and the underclassmen really, made sure that Derby football kept rolling along. And that was a great season. And, you were a very underrated quarterback who, had a lot of good stats that year that sometimes get unnoticed. But, I really do congratulate you on the great season you had on that 84 season.
Thanks.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you, and I really enjoyed it. And thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Folks, like I said before, I've been trying to get Brian Oliver on for a few years. When we do our Hall of Fame, folks, and we talk about, Derby teams, different teams, a lot of guys will always talk about Brian and how, he was a very underrated quarterback, did a lot of great things for that 84 team. And I mean, we talked a little about the Cheshire game. We talked about the Seymour game and stuff. But I think the biggest thing I took out of Brian tonight is, the respect he had for his coaches and his teammates. He gave a lot of credit to that big game he had in Amity with the, running back making the big 90-yard run. So that's all you need to know about Brian Oliver. He's a stand-up guy. He was a very good quarterback for Derby. And, he'll always have his place in Derby football. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone. All right.